Hello Vault Dwellers, and welcome back for another Fallout Cookbook cooking video. Today I'm going to be making the Deathclaw Wellingham from the Fallout Cookbook. The ingredients that we're going to need are 2.5 pounds of a boneless pork shoulder roast that I've gone ahead and cubed. We're also going to need for the vegetables 1 large russet potato that I've gone ahead and cubed up. And I've got them sitting in 1 cup of chicken stock, which we also need for the recipe. And this is just going to help prevent them from turning brown until it's time to add them into the pot. I've got 2 cups of mushrooms that I've chopped into large bite-sized pieces, as well as 2 medium carrots, 2 ribs of celery, 1 medium yellow onion, 1 large leek, 3 cloves of garlic, 2 tablespoons of tomato paste, 1/4 cup of cornstarch, 1/4 cup of vodka. We're going to need 1 egg yolk later on. For our spices, we're going to need 2 bay leaves, 1/2 teaspoon of caraway seeds, and 1 teaspoon of rosemary. In this bag, I have 1/4 cup of all-purpose flour with 1 teaspoon of salt and 1 teaspoon of black pepper added into it. And we're going to use this to season and coat our pork with. And the last thing we're going to need are 2 sheets of puff pastry. So let's get some of these things out of our way and go ahead and get started. Alright guys, so the first thing we need to do is season our pork. And all I'm going to do is just take it and dump it straight into the bag and seal it up, and then we'll get it all coated. And this is just a really easy way and not quite as messy as using a bowl to coat your pork with. And we're just going to shake this up really well, make sure the flour is evenly distributed on it. There we go. I think that looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and get you guys moved over to my stove, and we're going to go ahead and start browning up the pork. Alright guys, and now that I've got you over to my stove, I'm just going to simply start laying our pork in and letting it start to brown up. I don't want to move it around too much. Once it stops sticking to the bottom of the pan, I'll know it's ready to turn over. We're going to be doing this in batches, because we don't want to overcrowd our pan. Let me actually turn my heat down a little bit. We don't want to burn it. But we do want to get some color on these and help seal in some of the flavor. Alright guys, as you can see, these have already started browning up, and I've already gone ahead and started turning some of them over. And while I'm doing this, I would like to remind you of the Gamers and Geeks playlist that JP Death and I have going on our channels. It is a collaboration between JP Death and I to get the community cooking. It is a community-driven playlist made up of recipes and videos by you, our friends and YouTube family. If you would like to be a part of it, all you have to do is go out and make a cooking video and then post it to your channel. And once you've done that, all you have to do is let either JPIC or I know in the comment section of our latest cooking videos, or if you're a part of our Discord servers, you can let us know there as well. So, you know, we would really highly encourage you to go out there and give it a try, even if it's not something you normally do. You might find out that you have more fun with it than what you think you would. Alright guys, I'm going to go ahead and start removing the ones that are done and get our next batch in. And when these are all browned off, I'll bring you back for the next step. Alright guys, we have got these all browned up. I'm just going to remove the last ones from the pan. And then we can go ahead and start sauteing our vegetables. And all I'm going to do is add another tablespoon of oil to the pan. And to go ahead and dump all our vegetables in. as well as our garlic. And our spices. At this point, I'm also going to add just a small pinch of salt, and this is going to help our vegetables soften up just a little bit faster, as well as add a little bit of flavor. It's always good to salt as you go if you can. Now I'm just going to continue to let these cook for probably about 5 minutes, just until they start to soften up slightly and the onions start turning translucent. Alright guys, our onions are starting to turn translucent and the carrots have started to soften up a little bit. So at this point I'm going to go ahead and add in our vodka and let it start deglazing our pan, getting all the brown bits up off the bottom. We want to make sure we get all those in. I'm just going to let the alcohol cook off a little bit before we add in our tomato paste. There we go. Then what I like to do with tomato paste is kind of move my vegetables up to the sides there. And I'm going to drop it straight in to the middle. And I'm going to let that start browning up a little bit. Or at least cooking down and getting that raw tomato paste flavor out. It's always a good idea to let your tomato paste cook for just a little bit before you start adding in any of your other ingredients. Kind of like if it was raw flour you were putting in, you would want to cook that taste out just a little bit. Let's start getting it all incorporated in now. Sorry for all the steam. Hopefully you guys can see this pretty good. It smells amazing already. Alright guys, I've let this cook for about a minute. And now I'm just going to go ahead and add in the chicken broth as well as the potatoes. Let's get those stirred around. And I'm going to add my pork back in, as well as any juices that have stayed on the plate. And now we're just going to stir this in, and this really looks like it may need a little more chicken stock than what it called for. We should end up with a nice gravy out of this, and that is not quite enough. So let me go ahead and add in a little bit more, and then we'll let this simmer for a while. So since we're kind of making a stew at this point that we're going to thicken up and have the broth turn into a gravy, we do need a little bit more, at least enough to cover this. So let me get this one open too. And I'm going to add this in. And I think just enough until it covers our pork and vegetables. So about 4 cups altogether. Yeah, definitely. It definitely needed it. Alright guys, I think that is going to be enough at this point. And some of that is going to cook off as this simmers. So I'm going to crank my heat all the way up. I'm going to add my 2 bay leaves at this point as well. And just kind of gently submerge those down into the liquid. Don't want to break those up because we do want to remove those later. Alright guys, at this point we've got it nice and covered. I think that's going to be plenty of liquid. And I will amend the ingredient list down in the comment section to include 4 cups of the chicken broth, just so you don't end up short if you do try to make this recipe. All I'm going to do now that it's starting to come up to a boil is I'm going to put a lid on it, drop it down to a medium-low heat, I'm going to let it simmer for 30 minutes before we come back and add in our mushrooms. So I will see you guys at that point. Alright guys, it's been 30 minutes and it's now time to go ahead and add in our mushrooms. And all we're going to do is just stir these in and let them simmer for another 15 minutes and we'll be able to move on to the next step. While the stew is simmering and the mushrooms are cooking for their 15 minutes, I thought I'd go ahead and bring you over here and we go ahead and get the tops cut out for our pot pies. And this is just our puff pastry. I'm just going to lightly roll it out just to help seal the edges, the fold edges. And I'm just going to take my container, my ramekin that I'm using. I'm going to place it down. I'm just going to trim around this a little bit larger than the container. And if we need to, we can always trim it off after we've gotten our pies assembled. So I'm going to go ahead and continue working on these, and I will bring you back when it's time to thicken up our stew. Alright guys, it's been 15 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and remove our bay leaves out because they have done their job and we don't need them anymore. And I'm going to go ahead and take a half of a cup of cold water and dump in our cornstarch so we can make a slurry to help thicken up our gravy here. Make sure you use cold water, that way the cornstarch will dissolve. If you use hot water, it's just going to turn into a lumpy mess and you'll never get those lumps out. So let me go ahead and start adding this in. And now I'm just going to let this cook until it starts to slightly thicken up. Which, as you can see, does not take very long at all. I'm going to go ahead and turn my heat off. And at this point, I want to check it for seasoning. I want to see if it needs any more salt or any more pepper before we continue on with the next step. That's really good, but it does need a little bit more pepper. And it definitely needs a little bit more salt. And remember, salt and pepper to your family's taste. Here we go. Alright guys, that looks pretty good. Let me go ahead and move you back over to my other counter and we'll get our pot pies assembled and ready to bake. Alright guys, let's go ahead and start getting our pot pies together. I'm just going to take our stew and ladle it right into our ramekins and make a mess along the way, it looks like. I want to fill this up, but I don't want to overfill it. I think that looks pretty good right there. Let's clean up our edges a little bit so the puff pastry will stick to it. There we go. And maybe just a tad bit more of the gravy. That looks good. And what I kind of like to do with puff pastry when I'm working with it for pot pies is I tend to lightly paint the edge of my ramekin with a little bit of the egg wash, and this is just a beaten egg yolk. We're not doing the whole egg this time. And this is just gonna let our puff pastry stick to the top of our ramekin. I kind of like to drape it over the edges a little bit so it forms kind of a top. I don't want to push it down too much because then it won't puff up very well. And we do want to make sure we put some holes in the top to allow the steam to escape. Alright guys, I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of these all together. Alright guys, I've got these all topped up, and the last thing we actually need to do is brush our tops with our egg yolk so that they'll be nice and brown when they come out. And then I'm going to put these over in a 400-degree oven and let them bake for 15 minutes. And then once they're done, I'll let them cool off just a little bit before we try them. So our pot pies are done, and I had forgotten to turn the camera back on. As you can see, the crust is nice and brown, and everything is all nice and done and tender on the inside. Very hot, but very delicious. I was a little afraid of the rosemary in the beginning. I thought it was going to be a little bit too much, but it's perfectly balanced. And I wouldn't change anything out of the ingredient list. So there we go guys. Here's our pork pot pie, or Deathclaw Wellingham from the Fallout Cookbook. I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. If you have, leave me a comment down below. Remember to check out the Gamers and Geeks playlist as well as my Fallout Cookbook playlist. I will leave links down in the description to them. And as always, thank you so very much for joining me today. I've been Vault Girl. I hope you guys have enjoyed, and I hope I see you in the next one.